Located in the mountainous Pacific Northwest, Washington State has its fair share of serpentine, from which chrysotile asbestos is produced. There are at least 5 past producers in the northern part of the state, as well as numerous serpentine deposits in the Central Cascades and in the Okanogan Highlands in the northeastern region north of Spokane, itself only about 80 miles southwest of Libby, Montana. A major cluster of serpentine is located in the center of the state around Ellensburg and Wenatchee, although these have not been commercially exploited. Asbestos mortality. In part because of popular films and TV shows, the population of Washington State continues to increase largely through immigration. Between 1980 and 2000, the number of Washington residents rose from 4.1 million to nearly 5.9 million, most of which is concentrated in the Puget Sound area. During this period, 1,776 victims succumbed to asbestos poisoning. Asbestosis was responsible for about 55% of these deaths statewide. Figures for King County, center of Washington State's maritime industries, where 464 of these fatalities occurred, were roughly similar. Shipbuilding in the Northwest. A study carried out at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, followed 4,700 former workers employed at a Coast Guard shipbuilding and repair facility. Duration of employment was a determining factor in the development of mesothelioma, and the researchers observed a significantly elevated mortality for lung cancer among machinists. The conclusion: employment in this Coast Guard shipyard revealed a small but significant excess mortality from all causes, lung cancer and mesothelioma, most of which is probably related to asbestos exposure. According to some estimates, asbestos ultimately killed as many shipyard workers as there were service personnel killed in the line of duty during the Second World War. Asbestos insulation and pipe lagging were used in great amounts in the construction of seagoing vessels, and in the closed environment below decks, these fibers were liable to become very concentrated. Paper and pulp mills. The timber industry has always been a large part of the economy in the Pacific Northwest, and the paper industry is among the secondary industries that are a derivative of it. Asbestos-containing products may still be in any number of places in the buildings that house paper and pulp mills, as these industries have been around for many years in Northwest communities. In addition, some of the machinery and materials used in the paper-making process itself, primarily the drying felts and the adhesives used to affix them, contained asbestos. Power plants. Washington State has both hydroelectric and nuclear power plants. Most of the latter have been shut down, however. Regardless of how they are run, power plants are known to be a serious hazard to workers when it comes to asbestos exposure. In one study conducted on Puerto Rican power plant employees, 13% showed abnormalities in their chest x-rays that suggested the early stages of asbestos disease. Oil refineries. Washington State is not an oil producer, but as part of the Pacific Rim and the first U.S. port of call for tankers from Alaska, it is home to numerous oil refineries. Even without asbestos, working with petrochemicals is hazardous. It is highly volatile as well as toxic. Ironically, a great deal of asbestos exposure in the oil industry was due to the protective gear designed specifically to protect workers from injury. Overcoats, hoods, and gloves were lined with asbestos, which could become friable if the outer fabric became worn or was ripped open. The aluminum industry. A fair number of asbestos lawsuits in Washington have been filed by those who worked in one of the state's several aluminum plants. Aluminum production has been an important industry since the Second World War. The manufacturing process requires high levels of heat, not as hot as steel production, but hot enough to present a hazard, for which asbestos insulation seemed to be an appropriate solution. Unfortunately, these insulating materials had a tendency to deteriorate over the years, crumbling into a friable state in which fibers were released into the air. Legal resources in Washington. A search through the Washington Federal District Court cases for asbestos-related personal injury product liability lawsuits brings up a list of 7 lawsuits from 2006 and 2007. General Electric Company and C.H. Murphy Clark Ullman Incorporated are defendants in multiple cases, although General Electric appears to just be petitioning for removal from asbestos litigation. The other defendants in these cases are Asbestos Corp. Limited, Elliott Company, and IMO Industries Incorporated. Washington is ranked 7th in the U.S. for asbestos-related deaths, according to the Environmental Working Group. Of special concern is King County, which has the 4th highest number of asbestos-related deaths in the U.S. This is likely because the area was home to plants that processed asbestos-containing vermiculite brought in from Libby, Montana. The area may also have been exposed to asbestos because it was the site of shipbuilding during World War II. At that time, the shipbuilding industry used asbestos products. From 1979 to 2001, there were 260 deaths from asbestosis in King County. During the same period, 204 deaths in the county were attributed to mesothelioma. Washington has a number of known asbestos sites. There are multiple known sites in Anacortes, Ferndale, Goldendale, Richland, Tacoma, and Vancouver. Other known asbestos exposure sites in the state include the Bremerton Naval Shipyard and Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, the Centralia, Washington Public Power Plant in Centralia, the Arco Oil Refinery and Intalco Aluminum in Cherry Point, and the FFTF Nuclear Power Plant in Hanford, the Chevron Chemical Plant, and Unocal Chemical Plant in Kennewick, the Reynolds Metals Aluminum Plant in Longview, the Voyage Repair Station in Port Angeles, the Washington Public Power Plant in Satsop, the Puget Sound Bridge Yards, and Chevron Cracking Plant in Seattle, the Fairchild Air Force Base, and Kaiser Aluminum in Spokane, the Midnight Uranium Mine in Wellprint, and the Alcoa Aluminum Plant and the Dow Chemical Plant in Wanatahchee. Individuals living or working near these areas should be checked regularly for signs of mesothelioma in order to file any lawsuits within the state's statute of limitations. While many of these sites have been inspected and some have been cleaned up, anyone who worked or lived in these areas before asbestos contamination was reported can still be affected. Also, it is important to keep in mind that these are only known asbestos sites. Other areas in the state may also contain asbestos, but may not have yet been reported as such. A key asbestos-related case in Washington took place in 2007 when a Washington pipe fitter was awarded over $1 million in a lawsuit. The man worked in a pulp mill plant in Port Angeles between 1959 and 1992. During this time, he was exposed to asbestos because the pipes were covered with the material. In 1996, the plaintiff was diagnosed with mesothelioma as a result of his exposure. According to Washington state law, only those companies that actually supplied or produced the asbestos in question are legally liable. Tracking down the responsible parties was made difficult because the pulp mill had been closed for some time at the time of diagnosis. Several other companies responsible for causing the plaintiff's mesothelioma were undergoing bankruptcy reorganization at the time of the verdict, but were still scheduled to pay settlements to the plaintiff. Those interested in filing lawsuits should know that the statute of limitations for personal injury law in Washington is 3 years, with the discovery rule that states that this amount of time begins when the problem, in this case a mesothelioma, either was discovered or should have been discovered. Wrongful death cases follow the same statute of limitations and discovery rule. There is no special statute for asbestos cases in Washington. Thank you for watching. This video was produced by Asbestos.Net, a leading resource on all aspects of asbestos and mesothelioma. Our priority is to inform victims about the devastating effects of asbestos exposure, mesothelioma, asbestos cancer, asbestosis, and other asbestos-related diseases, and to advise them with a wealth of information. Individuals whose lives have been touched by mesothelioma have numerous questions and concerns. Their caregivers and family members also need accurate, reliable information. If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or asbestos cancer and need more information, we invite you to visit and explore the thousands of pages of oncologist-reviewed material on Asbestos.net, to call our convenient toll-free number shown below and speak with a mesothelioma specialist, or to use the simple contact form found at Asbestos.net to request a free copy of our informative books, custom inserts, and DVD. Asbestos.net. Information and help for patients and families.